everyone, it's Jack from Cultaholic.com, and it's time to talk about AEW's All Out. We now have the answers to several questions we had before the show, such as who's going to be the first AEW champion? Will the show be considered a success on the whole? In my opinion, yes. And what happened? Let's look at everything that happened. Let's waste no further time and let's run through all the matches, because this is what happened at AEW's All Out. We start things off on the pre-show with the 21-woman Casino Battle Royale, the winner of which would go into that match to crown the first ever AEW Women's Champion. Nyla Rose was in the first group that started off, and she looked pretty dominant early on. We also got some comedy spots early on as well with the Librarians, we all love them, with Leva Bates almost being eliminated, but then Peter Avalon laying some books there for her to use as like little stepping stones to get back into the ring. Great teamwork there, but it didn't work because she and all the other women, I believe, in the first group as well, were eliminated by a very dominant-looking Nyla Rose. Britt Baker was in the second group out, and then Bea Priestley was in the third group out, and basically Britt went straight for Bea on the ramp, which was a really good continuation of their budding feud. The match did a really good job, actually, of continuing some storylines that have been pre-established. Brandi Rhodes also featured using Awesome Kong as her muscle, getting her in the way, using her to attack her rivals, but eventually it didn't work as both Kong and then Brandi were eliminated from the match. Two of maybe the favourites going in, but eventually I think everybody started to fall by the wayside and a group of final competitors established itself. Some surprise entrants as well that were unannounced beforehand included Nicole Savoy and ODB, who is still as over as ever, but neither of those really made it to the final showdown in the middle of the ring. Just before we get to the closing stages of the match as well, let's mention the Joker. In the men's version in Las Vegas, of course, it was Adam Page who went on to win the match. The women's Joker didn't go on to win the match, but I was still very excited to see her be revealed as Mercedes Martinez. A very wise decision by AEW in my opinion. She got a nice big pop. Everyone really appreciated seeing her there, and I really hope she becomes a regular member of the women's division heading forwards. But yes, we got down to the final three of Nyla Rose, who'd been in there from the start, Bea Priestley and Britt Baker, who temporarily put their rivalry aside to take on the larger woman, but eventually it was actually Nyla Rose who picked up the victory. They did the kind of the 92 Royal Rumble finish, so Britt eliminated Bea, and then Bea spitefully snagged her arm, allowing Nyla Rose to eliminate Britt and win the match. Yeah, this wasn't the cleanest Rumble style match ever, but it did do a good job, as I mentioned, of continuing the storylines heading forward. So Bea and Britt went straight for each other, and Ali also went straight for Brandi Rhodes, which was nice to see. Next up, the only other match on the pre-show, Angelico and Jack Evans taking on the Private Party, and given the four men in the match, as you'd expect, there are a lot of flips and nimble athleticism on display. It was a really fun match, quite a short one, about 10 minutes long, but it did help get the crowd warmed up for the main show. Despite both teams kind of being baby faces, the Private Party were the de facto baby faces of this match. They're the less cocky of the two teams, they're the new up-and-comers, and I think it was nice to see the crowd get really behind such a new and exciting tag team, and also it was nice to see them pick up the victory, hitting the gin and juice, kind of like a Hurricane Rana, into a cutter, a nice double team finisher, and a nice win, the first win in AEW, I believe, for the Private Party. After the match, the two teams showed good sportsmanship towards each other, but then Angelico and Jack Evans immediately jumped them from behind, turning heel, which I think is a very good decision. Yes, both Angelico and Jack Evans have a really crowd-pleasing, eye-catching moveset, but they do also both have a very innate cockiness that's easy to really hate. So I think it's a good decision to turn them heel, and I am excited to see what they do going forwards, and of course, excited to see what the Private Party do as well. Then, just before the main show started, we had a video package, a vignette for a new wrestler called Wardlow, who I'll be honest, I've never heard of before. I'm not familiar with him at all. If you are, please maybe leave some info in the comment section down below. It was a really cheesy hype package, to be honest. It was him beating up some thugs in a parking lot in a very Hollywood sort of style. It wasn't my sort of thing. It was a bit too over the top and silly for me and quite cheesy, but at the same time it did help establish this new guy, I guess, as a big, important star, or at least I guess maybe that's the plan. But now we moved on to the main show with JR joining commentary, and we started off with 6-man tag team action between SCU, Daniels Kazarian and Scorpio Sky against the team of Luchasaurus, Jungle Boy and Marko Stunt. SCU, of course, cut one of their promos beforehand where they declared Chicago to be the worst town they'd ever been in, and you know what, they're really great in this show opening role, kind of like the New Age Outlaws, but a bit more babyface, and I just think that, yeah, they're really entertaining, and then of course, they've all got the work rate, they've all got the wrestling ability to back it up. This was, like the previous tag match, another kind of spot-heavy, fast-paced match, exciting for the crowd early on in the show. I'd say it was maybe a little bit less polished than the previous match, but I do think it was also kind of a more fun and memorable one. It's also worth noting that while pretty much everyone in this match was really over, Luchasaurus is so over, and also, in my opinion, is probably one of the more exciting hot tags in the business right now. At one stage, he took out all 3 members of SCU with a series of just like flips and evasive maneuvers and martial arts kicks, and he's huge, and he's a dinosaur. Literally, what is there not to love about him? But it was actually SCU who picked up the hard-fought victory, wisely taking care of Luchasaurus to one side out of the ring, and then scooping up both Marko, Stunt, and Jungle Boy for a big triple team finisher, the best Meltzer ever. After the match, the two teams, again like the previous match, shook each other's hands, all raised each other's arms and showed good sportsmanship, but this time nobody turned heel, which I think was the right call. Next up, and quite shockingly in my opinion, we got the second match on the main portion of the card, Kenny Omega versus Pac, this early on. Pac, of course, was a replacement for Jon Moxley, but it was still quite fitting because Pac, of course, had to pull out of his planned match at Double or Nothing with Hangman Page. In terms of just pure work rate, this was probably the best match on the card, and it's not really a surprise given the fact that they are 2 of the best wrestlers in the world. And not only that as well, but they definitely had a chemistry with one another in the ring. You could really tell due to the slickness of their exchanges and everything. They're just both absolute elite level wrestlers. There was one botch towards the end, I think it was a reverse Rana, but it didn't ruin the match or anything, and they moved on after that. And it was pretty much the only flaw in what was a very, very high quality match. Well, actually, I don't know if you can count them as botches, really. They weren't. I mean, they were hit as well as they could be, but both men did huge dives to the outside at separate points during the match, and both of them snagged like a leg or a shin on the guardrail, and it looked really painful. They still hit the moves, and the guy still caught the other one, but there was some nasty clattering into that guardrail. Not just in this match, over the course of the night 1 or 2 times as well. The pair started off slowly, trying to one-up each other, and it all progressed into both men hitting bigger and bigger moves. Omega was able to successfully nail several V-triggers, but he couldn't quite hit the one-winged angel. He went for it several times, and Pac was always able to counter, and his last counter was into the Brutalizer submission, which quite abruptly and quite shockingly choked out Kenny Omega. Clean as a whistle, a huge victory for Pac on his AEW debut. In fact, the way this match was going, I thought it may well be heading for a time limit draw, which would have been a risky move, I guess, this early on in the show. Maybe it would have sapped the crowd's energy a bit too early, but they didn't. They gave Pac the shockingly straightforward win. I mean, that's not to say that it was a one-sided match at all. It was very back and forth, but just the simplicity of the way in which he beat Kenny Omega was a really bold booking decision, but not a bad one. And afterwards, when Omega was being helped out, he really did look like a broken man, and I wonder if this is going to lead to an angle where he has to kind of find redemption after 2 big singles losses early on in his AEW career. In everybody's AEW. Kenny Omega hasn't got off to the best start in AEW, kayfabe wise. Next up, the no DQ Cracker Barrel Clash pitting Jimmy Havoc against Darby Allin against Joey Janela. This was pretty insane. So this started off with Janela and Darby teaming up on Jimmy Havoc, taping him to a steel chair on the outside, like sitting him in the chair and then duct taping into it. Then they put thumbtacks in his mouth, and then they taped his mouth shut with more duct tape. It's good to see that in 2019, even with all these flashy moves going on and everything, that the catch-as-catch-can style still lives on. At one point as well, Joey Janela went to fetch a weapon from under the ring, and the first thing he retrieved was a tennis racket, which he looked at and then kind of just went like, ugh, what? And threw it away. And on commentary, they were cracking jokes like, who would use that? A pretty clear shot at Jim Cornette, of course, who has been very critical of several aspects of AEW since its beginning, but especially Joey Janela. I'm now just going to run through a list of the more insane things that happened in this match, really. It was a spot fest, of course, but it's what everyone wanted to see, and there was plenty of lovely, crunchy, hardcore stuff to please everyone. So Joey Janela at one point was in a chair. Jimmy Havoc went to monkey flip him, and Janela landed on the chair upright, like in the middle of the ring. I think I've seen a gif of him doing that before on the indies somewhere. I'm sure you'll correct me if I'm wrong. Later on, he sunset bombed Darby Allin, maybe the biggest spot of the match, through a table on the outside, like off the apron. That was an absolutely insane spot. Darby Allin then got his own back with a spot of his own. He obviously used to be quite the skater. He got a skateboard with all these thumbtacks on the bottom of it, pointing outwards and dropped it, like jumped off the top rope, and I don't know what it's called. Is it an ollie? Is it an acid drop? He landed on Joey Janela's back, like with the thumbtacks, driving quite a few of them actually into Janela's back. He also then got one of the cracker barrels, of course, which thankfully were hollow, not solid, and he held it like behind his back and then did the coffin drop onto Jimmy Havoc, who was on some ring steps on the outside, but Havoc moved and Darby Allin just crashed, destroying the barrel and landing back first on the ring steps. That didn't look fun at all, really. And then finally, back in the ring, Jimmy Havoc superplexed Joey Janela onto the other cracker barrel. His leg went through it, and then Havoc scooped him up and hit the acid rainmaker through the barrel to pick up a pretty big victory, and I think Jimmy Havoc's first in AEW as well. Next up, that tag team match for a bye in the first round of the AEW Tag Team Championship tournament once AEW starts on TV. It was the Best Friends versus the Dark Order. This was a pretty good back and forth tag team match. It wasn't the best match on the show, but it was certainly decent. It was just harmed by the fact that I think the crowd were pretty burned out after Omega versus Pac, and then that insane hardcore match as well. They did a really good job here, I guess, of keeping you guessing who was going to win. There were lots of near falls, and I think also traditionally you'd expect the heels to win this, because in a tournament it's obviously best for the heel to have the bye so that they're less tired later on when they meet some baby faces down the line, and it gives them the edge for the baby faces to overcome. But then again, on the other hand, I can't think of many tag teams in the world who would use a bye week better than the Best Friends. I thought they may be about to do some kind of hilarious skit on the first week of TV or something, but that's not what happened. In the end though, it was the little minions of the Dark Order who got involved behind the referee's back and helped turn the tide in the favour of the Dark Order. They were able to hit their double team finisher, the Fatality, on Trent Berreta and earn that bye for the first round of the tag team tournament. Afterwards, all the minions scooped up Trent Berreta and they looked to carry him to the back, but then the lights went down, and when they came back up, Orange Cassidy was in the ring. He obviously kept his hands in his pockets the whole way through and hit a nice suicide dive with his hands in his pockets, got back in the ring and basically saved the Best Friends from being abducted or further beaten down or whatever by the Dark Order. The two Best Friends hugged him, and it's pretty clear that now Orange Cassidy is aligned with the Best Friends, and he signed a contract with AEW. Everyone's picking a side. It's all turned into gang warfare. Oh, yes, I love a bit of stable action. That sounds really funny. Next up, Hikaru Shida versus Riho to determine Nyla Rose's opponent for the AEW Women's Championship. This was a good match, playing off the contrast between the two, with Shida looking to use her superior size and strength to overpower the plucky underdog in Riho. At several stages, it looked like Shida had the match won with some big strikes and some nice backbreakers and that sort of stuff, but Riho was always able to keep fighting and kicking out, and she was mainly actually looking to win via roll-up, which I thought was a really smart use of storytelling. Of course she would. She's the smaller and weaker woman, but she, I guess you could argue, might be a bit more technically sound. No, they were both really technically sound. I guess you could say she's more crafty by necessity. Finally, one of those roll-ups did pay off for Riho, and she was able to secure herself a match with Nyla Rose to see who's going to be the first AEW Women's Champion. It wasn't the sort of roll-up I've ever seen before either. It was some kind of crazy, like, spinning, tilt-the-world style roll-up, and it worked really well. Rose versus Riho should be a really good match for that title. You know, a classic bigger woman versus smaller woman contest. Nyla Rose came out on the stage for a little stare down with Riho as well, building to that match. But I do still wonder if they're going to tie up that loose end of Riho shoving down Yuka Sakazaki in that triple threat match with Nyla Rose. I don't know if they will. Maybe they will. I hope they do, because it's going to kind of frustrate me if they just let that pass without ever mentioning it again. Next up, the big grudge match between Cody Rhodes and Shawn Spears. The stipulation being, of course, the condition of the match being that each man is only allowed one accompanying member of his entourage to the ring. Shawn Spears, of course, picked Tully Blanchard, and Cody, well, he lined up MJF, Brandy, and DDP, and he picked MJF, and everyone went, "Oh, what are you doing?" Shawn Spears. Right, so Cody had Star Trek themed gear, which was really cool, but Shawn Spears looked awesome. His gear was, no pun intended, 10 out of 10 for me. It was really pretty ring gear. Also, apparently, as many people on Twitter pointed out, including Cultaholic's own Justin Henry, Shawn Spears made his entrance at 10:10 p.m. Eastern Time. Cody wasted no time, not even waiting for the ring bell, hitting a huge suicide dive onto Shawn Spears outside of the ring, and then clocking Tully Blanchard as well. Cody was serious here and looking for vengeance. They brawled through the crowd and everything, and everyone was loving it, and when they finally got back in the ring and the bell rang, it was all Cody from there on out, until MJF accidentally, we don't really know what's going on, accidentally distracted the referee, Earl Hebner by the way, allowing Shawn Spears to hit a low blow and turn the tide of the match. Tully Blanchard, who was great in the manager's role by the way, he then at one stage sneakily passed his belt to Shawn Spears, who whipped Cody with it and just absolutely tore up his back. It was really grisly stuff. But Cody fired up wonderfully. He's got such a great sense of babyface fire. His comebacks are really intense and always get the crowd going. But Spears was again able to turn the tide with a running, crunching Death Valley driver on the entrance ramp, and basically MJF had to will Cody on to beat the count and get back into the ring, and everyone's obviously hating MJF at this point but still wanting Cody to win. Cody hit a crossroads, but Tully distracted the referee, and then MJF wanted to fight Tully, and it was all a bit silly and hilarious, but also made you just hate MJF even more. Shawn Spears got involved and blindsided MJF, taking him out, and then Arn Anderson hit the ring and blasted Shawn Spears with a spinebuster. Yes! Absolutely incredible scenes. Arn cleared off after that. He just wanted to level the playing field, I guess, and just nailed Shawn Spears with that spinebuster. Still looked great. Shawn Spears sold it wonderfully. Of course you have to. It's an Arn Anderson spinebuster. And then Tully followed on to the back being like, what the hell, what are you doing? I thought we were bros. I thought we were the Four Horsemen. What are you doing, man? Spears, in desperation, introduced a chair into the match, and then Cody managed to get control of it and really wanted to use it. Spears is begging him to hit him, but instead, Cody threw it down, hit the Dusty Rhodes elbow, hit the beautiful disaster kick, but a Van Daminator version with Spears holding the chair, and then finally the crossroads to pick up the victory. I was surprised that Shawn Spears didn't win this, I'll be quite honest with you. However, it was another great storytelling match, which are really becoming Cody's hallmark ever since that wonderful encounter with Dustin Rhodes in Las Vegas. After the match as well, the storytelling wasn't done, as MJF picked up the chair, looked at it behind Cody's back, and then Cody turned around and he was like, yeah, screw that chair, you're the man, Cody. That little clip, you know, is going to be used in a video package of the future. Next up, the penultimate match of the night, the Escalera de la Muerte match, pitting the Young Bucks against the Lucha Brothers for the Lucha Brothers AAA Tag Team Championship. I can't go through, obviously, all the ridiculous spots in this match, but I will say that it was a really strong one of the best matches on the card, because there was a nice mixture. It wasn't just crazy spots all the time, although of course there were plenty of those. There was also a good sense of storytelling as well. At several stages, two members of opposing teams would be set to hit simultaneous moves on their respective opponents, and they'd look at each other and egg each other on to do it and do further damage to each other's teammates, if that makes sense. It was a real game of one-upmanship, with everyone not only trying to prove who was the better team, but prove who could do the craziest stuff. And personally, my MVP in this match was Phoenix. I think he's absolutely unbelievable, and again delivered in a high-stakes, really risky match. His springboard stuff is absolutely insane. I reckon he's the best guy in terms of springboards in wrestling today. Towards the end, Nick Jackson got pushed off a ladder when it looked like he was on the verge of grabbing those belts, pushed off a ladder, through two tables on the outside in theory, but what actually happened was he got pushed off the ladder was too far away from that side of the ring, he clipped one of his feet on the top rope and just plummeted through one of the tables, kind of hitting the edge of the other one, which didn't break, and he looked pretty messed up from that. I mean, his hand alone was all cut up and bleeding. I dread to think what else he may have hurt on that landing, and I really hope he's okay. But then it looked like the Young Bucks were still going to win, even with only one member of the team still in the match, still alive basically. Matt Jackson unmasking Pentagon and then super kicking Phoenix out of midair, and it looked like he was going to win the whole thing, but then the Lucha Brothers were able to regain control, shoving him off the ladder. He took a horrible bump spine first onto the ladder as it fell beneath him. Pentagon got the mask back on, they finished him off, and the Lucha Brothers retained their AAA Tag Team Championships. But the drama wasn't over there, as masked men hit the ring attacking both teams and revealed themselves to be the newest signings of AEW, Santana and Ortiz, formerly known of course as LAX. They are brilliant, one of the best tag teams in the world, and I cannot wait to see them in action. And finally, the main event to determine the first ever AEW World Champion, Chris Jericho versus Hangman Adam Page. Hangman Page, as he'd been teasing in the build-up to the match, entered on an actual real-life horse. His family were also at ringside, and it all did quite seem to be set up for him to win the match and become the first ever AEW World Champion. It just seemed destined for a big babyface victory to close the show. This was a pretty long match. I think it probably went about 25 minutes, maybe even approaching half an hour, and that's totally fitting given the stature of the match and what it meant and the high stakes. But at the same time, the crowd were pretty tired by this point, I think it's fair to say, and they were on board for the big moments of the match, but I don't think they were fully on board all the way through. There were long stages of dominance by both men. Jericho had a lengthy heat segment just beating down Hangman Page, trying to turn everyone against him and cheer on Page to victory, but obviously because of Jericho's popularity and legacy in wrestling, there was still a very vocal pro-Jericho contingent. But the tide was turned when Page did like a big discus elbow, or maybe it was just a right hand, busting Jericho open. He bladed on the outside of the ring, he rolled out of the ring, and then when he came back, he was covered in blood just above the eye. A pretty nice callback actually to earlier on in the feud with the attack on Hangman and the fact that he required all those stitches, which he later tore out in a very intense promo. In the end, with both men trading big moves like Page hitting several buckshot lariats over the course of the match, Jericho having the walls locked in or the lion tamer quite a few times, they managed to eventually start hitting their finishers on each other, or some of their finishers in the case of Jericho, who's got about 4. Jericho hit the Codebreaker, Page kicked out, Page hit the Deadeye, Jericho kicked out, and it all seemed to be very even heading into the closing stretch. Page hit another buckshot lariat, went for the Deadeye again, but Jericho countered it, rolled out, and both men went for simultaneous strikes. Hangman went for another discus elbow or discus forearm or whatever, another spinning strike. Jericho went for his Judas Effect back elbow and nailed it just before Page could connect and fell across him and picked up the victory. And now Chris Jericho is the first ever AEW World Champion. This was a weird one, right? Because I guess there's pros and cons to Jericho winning the match. On one hand, you know, he's a huge name and he's going to get a lot of attention on AEW for being the first champion. More attention than Hangman Page would, of course. On the other hand, would you not rather have had Page win the title and have a homegrown guy as your first ever champion? Then again, if Page does build himself back up and becomes an even bigger star and does take that title from Jericho, then of course he's gonna be far more benefited by that in the long run. It's a weird decision, and it did end the show with a big heel victory. I mean, of course, sometimes that happens on big shows, but it was still quite strange. It was one of those ones where you're seeing Jericho pose with the title at the top of the ramp, and you're thinking, who's going to come out and clock him? Who's going to be the next challenger? And none of that happened, and we just faded to black, and that was the show. On the whole, I think All Out can definitely be considered a big success. There were no bad matches on this show. There were just ones that were better than others. My personal favourite was probably Cody versus Shawn Spears, but in terms of pure wrestling, pure work rate, it's hard to look past Kenny Omega versus Pac, or indeed that Bucks versus Lucha Brothers ladder match. But I do hope Nick Jackson's okay, because he took a pretty nasty spill. So yeah, that is what happened at AEW's All Out. Thank you very much for watching, and mine and Sam's reactions will be out in the very near future. Thanks very much for watching, and let us know what you think in the comments section down below. You can follow Cultaholic on Twitter at Cultaholic and on Facebook at facebook.com/Cultaholic. If you enjoy what we do, then please do check out our Patreon, patreon.com/Cultaholic, where you can pledge. And don't forget, of course, most importantly of all, to hit subscribe and to join us.